After a public humiliation instigated by a jealous ex-girlfriend, how will Gemini face the misunderstandings and doubts of the entire pack? What measures will Layton take to protect his mate and restore her reputation in the pack? Join our pack. Subscribe to start your adventure. Chapter 6. I dressed in a pair of black jeans and a sweater, but Layton told me to change into something more formal. So I dressed into a knee-length red dress, which came in at the waist before flaring out in stiff pleats. I paired it with some small black flats. When I met Layton downstairs, he gave me a nod of approval. "Let's go," he stated, holding the front door open for me. I walked out and waited for Layton to join me. When he did, he placed his hand on the bottom on my back and pushed me to his car. He ushered me into the passenger's seat, before walking around to the driver's seat and starting the car. We drove for a few minutes in a tense silence. To swallow the quietness, I flicked the radio on. Layton glared in my direction, before turning the radio off. "I don't want to listen to the radio," he grumbled. "Sorry," I whispered out, eyes down in submission. When we arrived at the restaurant, I was shocked at the extravagance of it. The entire place was dimly lit, with small candles on each table, and the booths all had small spotlights above them. The glass windows were large, and showed the darkening street outside. Walking into the restaurant, a few people glanced our way. It was odd because even though the humans didn't know that Layton was an alpha, they still all knew of him. He had investments in lots of local and international businesses, and if he dealt with his work staff in the same manner as he did with his pack, I could see why even the local people feared him. "Mr. Vetteriano," the host said, eyes nervous as he looked at Layton. But he looked shocked at seeing me with him. I couldn't imagine Layton having company too often. I wasn't exactly thrilled to be his company either, but then I didn't really have a say in the matter. "Booth or table?" "Booth," Layton stated, voice just as cold and stiff as it always was. The waiter nodded and led us to a booth near the back. People whispered and stared as we walked past. I blushed slightly, not liking that I was the center of attention. As we sat down, Layton glanced at me. "Red or white?" he asked. I gave him a blank look, not knowing what he was on about. "Red or white wine?" he clarified when he saw my blank expression. "White," I said, more of a question than an answer. I had never drank before or even thought about drinking. I remembered all the times that Jacob got drunk at parties and would ask me to come pick him up. I used to borrow my sister's car and drive him home even though I wasn't that great of a driver. Layton turned back to the waiter. "Your best bottle of white," he ordered. The waiter nodded and scurried off. I could still feel everyone's eyes on us, and I squirmed uncomfortably. "Are you all right?" he asked. "Everyone is staring at us." Layton shrugged. "They probably think you're too young for me." His look told me that he didn't care about the matter, nor did he care about the other customs in the restaurant. "Do you think I'm too young for you?" I asked. I really wanted to know why he had chosen me, apart from the fact I was a challenge. And I had decided that I had to swallow my fear and ask the questions that had been gnawing me since meeting Andrea. Layton looked at me for a few seconds before he spoke again. "You are young, not in age but in the way you are. But I don't really care. You are mine, you belong to me." I was about to ask another thing when the waiter arrived. "Your wine, sir." He showed the bottle to Layton, who nodded yes. Then the waiter poured a small bit into 2 glasses and handed one to Layton and one to me. Layton smelt the wine and then took a sip. He looked like he knew what he was doing, so I copied. I couldn't say what it smelt like except strong and alcoholic. But I tasted it, and I grimaced slightly. It had a pungent taste, both dry and bitter. But there was a sweet aftertaste to it that I liked. "Good enough?" Layton asked me, and I nodded yes. I did like it. It was odd, but I liked. "That's fine. Put it on ice," Layton said to the waiter. He nodded and placed it inside a freestanding tub of ice not before pouring us both a full glass. "What can I get you to eat, sir?" the waiter asked Layton, who ordered something that sounded foreign. Then he turned to me. "And for you, miss?" Unsure, I pointed to something on the menu, not wanting to sound stupid by pronouncing it wrong. The waiter offered me a smile and wrote the order down. "Alpha Vetteriano," I began, but he cut me off. "Call me that one more time and I'll be very angry," Layton snapped. I gulped, scared, but nodded yes. "Layton, can I ask you some questions?" "You have questions about Andrea, I assume," Layton said. Once the waiter had gone, I nodded, blushing shyly, before I took a sip of the wine. With the second sip, the taste was becoming softer and tastier to me. You have all night to ask anything you want, and I will answer truthfully. How long were you two together? I began. Layton shrugged. About a month or two. Not long. Did you love her? Layton snorted in what I assumed was amusement, although with Layton, I would never try to guess what he was thinking or feeling. I didn't love her. I've never loved anyone. His words made me pause, and I thought of what he was saying. You must get awfully lonely, I commented. Layton glanced at me for a few seconds, green eyes scanning over my face carefully. Sometimes the house is too big for one, was all he replied. I could tell by his tone that the conversation was not to be pushed further. I wasn't stupid nor suicidal, so I changed the subject. Did you really only choose me because you liked that I didn't show any desire? I questioned, after taking another sip of my wine. The more I drank, the more I enjoyed it. I have spent my life with she-wolves throwing themselves at my feet, wanting me to mate them. It is in a she-wolf's nature to automatically feel desire to a person of position, so when you didn't, I liked that. I liked that I weren't like the other she-wolves. Layton paused, thinking before he carried on. I also liked that you were submissive. More than the average wolf anyway. Every she-wolf I have ever had been with has always thought they could control some aspect of my pack. I was sick of telling she-wolves that I run Endoro pack, no one else. Yet, they kept thinking if they disagreed with me then I would listen. When, in fact, I just got angry. I liked listening to Layton speak. It was the most I had heard his talk. He was a man of very few words, and I felt special that he was opening up to me. And I knew, just from your submissiveness, that you wouldn't get all power hungry if I made you the alpha female. I hope if you disagreed with me you would say something, but that you understand that we are not equals. I am the alpha, and I don't want a power struggle. I understood what he was saying to some extent. But I agreed. Layton had spent his life learning about being an alpha, training to be a leader. So I could see why he would get annoyed if someone who knew nothing of running a pack tried to come in and take over. I nodded at Layton. I don't want to run your pack. I wouldn't know how, I admitted. Layton looked pleased. I know, and that was one of the main reasons I wanted you. You had no desire to be an alpha female, or to be mated to an alpha, so I wanted you, because I knew you would appease me and wouldn't go on a power trip. I know how to run my pack, and I don't need anyone second-guessing me. I find it odd how well I suddenly understand Layton. He is dominant and liked to be in charge. He knows how to be an alpha, and despite the controversial way he deals with certain things, his pack respect him and he does right by them. I believe that Layton is a good alpha, and understand the demands of being a firm leader. So, I would never try and change the way he did things except maybe ask him to not be so harsh with people. But, then, it had worked for him for 25 years. Our waiter delivered our food, which smelt and looked amazing. And he left, not before pouring us both another glass of wine. I smiled at him in thank you, and Layton told me not to smile at him, that it was disrespecting when I was sat with another man. I thought I was only being polite, but I didn't fight him on the point. Why were you dating Andrea? I asked as we began to eat our food. Layton thought about the question for a few seconds, taking a bite of his meal before he answered. I need an heir, Gemini. I'm sure you understand that an alpha must have someone to train to take over the pack when they get too old. I want a pup, someone I can teach to run my pack. So, I took the actions to get myself an heir, he answered. So you were only with her so she could have your child. I couldn't deny that the fact made me feel happy, that him and Andrea weren't serious and he wasn't in love with her nor been in love with any girl before. But I wasn't stupid enough to think that meant he was going to fall head over heels for me. Yes, I wanted her to have my child. Then, after he was born, I would have either killed Andrea or sent her away. I would have raised the child myself, Layton answered. At his answer, my blood ran cold and I froze. I was shocked and disgusted. He planned to get a woman pregnant, and then kill her once the child was born. It was a barbaric thing that he could even think of doing. And I told him just that. It was a bold thing for me to do, and I was scared as I said it, terrified that he would get angry with me. Layton nodded at my words. Yes, it's not a nice thing, but a necessary thing. Do you plan to get me pregnant and then kill me? I asked, words as shaky as my hands. I can feel tears building behind my eyes, but I prayed they didn't spill over. No, of course not, Layton snorted as if I had just suggested the most absurd thing in the world. You're my mate, and I want you to bring up our pup with me. I understand that I come across as if I don't care. But I do care about you, Gemini. Once you're pregnant, we'll be a proper family. His words relax me slightly because I believe him wholeheartedly. It is odd because I know that Layton isn't lying to me. I don't know how I know, but I feel like Layton didn't lie to me, or he hasn't lied that far. Why am I different to Andrea? Or all the other she-wolves? I questioned, nervous for the answer. I feel like you fit, he replied. I was confused with his answer. Fit where? With me. I feel like you fit, and once you've had my pup you'll fit even better. Layton paused, looking at me closely before he carried on. I never wanted a mate, that is not a secret, but I wanted a pup again, not a secret. Yet, as soon as I saw you I felt like I wanted a mate, and not just to give me a pup. I felt like I wanted a mate for me. I feel selfish with you. Selfish? Yes, he nodded. I told you my desire for a pup, and I still have that desire. But I'm kind of worried that when I do get you pregnant, that the pup will have your attention. And I want all you attention. And I know it is ridiculous to be selfish over an unconceived pup, but I do. I want you for myself, so I will keep you for myself. Layton simply shrugged, nonchalant. How long until you hope for me to get pregnant? I questioned, nervous. Layton knew the answer without any thinking. He had it already planned out. I will give you a week to get used to life here, then I will mate you. After that, I will give you a month to be used to being my mate. Then we will try for a pup. There was no room for argument. Chapter 7. Layton asked me if I wanted dessert, and I did. We ordered some dessert and talked some more. There was a long wait for the third course, and Layton began to get impatient. I, on the other hand, just kept drinking the white wine that Layton had got. More than I should have done. Where is that damn waiter? Layton growled, annoyed. I took another sip of the wine, noticing how I felt a little bit drunk. My head felt like it was swimming, with Layton and the restaurant seeming further away than it was. I'm going to go find him and hurry him up. Layton moved, storming away from the table with frustration. I giggled at him. I didn't mean to, the sound just slipped out. Shocked, Layton paused, frozen on the spot, as if time had suddenly stopped. Then slowly, painfully slowly, he turned back around. His dark eyebrow raised, looking at me with confusion. I giggled again before slapping my hands over my mouth in an almost slapstick way. Layton watched me for a few seconds as if I was a hard equation he couldn't figure out. Sorry, I apologized, before I laughed again. The second time more manic and hysterical. Again I put my hand over my mouth to muffle the sound. Layton forgot about his quest to search for our delayed desserts, and walked over to me. How much have you had to drink? Layton demanded. He used his dominate voice. I bowed my head, eyes cast to the floor, but I couldn't help but giggle once more. Layton took a seat next to me and gripped my chin. He roughly forced my head up. He repeated his question, how much have you had to drink? 2 glasses, maybe 3, I replied, staring directly into Layton's emerald eyes. I took notice of how nice his eyes were, a swirling mixture of plush green, mint and gold. They were breathtaking eyes. If I were any good of an artist I would have wanted to paint them. I wanted to shout to the world how amazing his eyes were. You have beautiful eyes, I blurted. So you think I have nice eyes, yet you feel no desire towards me at all, he muttered, annoyed. You scare me, I admitted, still staring into his eyes. I shouldn't have been staring so intently into his eyes, it was disrespectful. Yet, Layton didn't scowl more, nor did he break the eye contact. He seemed to like that I was making eye contact with him. I wasn't submitting to him, and he liked it. Lots of people are scared of me, he commented. Doesn't that make you sad? Everyone is supposed to be scared of me, Layton stated, with a small shrug. People are scared of me, they don't fuck me or my pack. So, if people are scared then they leave me alone. However, I don't want you scared of me. Not now, we're mates. Just then the waiter turned up with our desserts. Layton turned away from me, finally breaking our intense eye contact, and glared at the waiter. We've been waiting far too long for this course. We don't want it now, take it back and I will not be paying for this or the bad service here, he snapped. I'm sorry, Mr. Veteriano. The waiter began, but I corrected him quickly. He likes to be called Layton, I told him, with a firm nod of the head. No, I don't, Layton snapped, furious. He looked angry, ready to kill. Call me Mr. Veteriano or we will have a problem. He was glaring at the waiter, trying to burn holes through his skin. The waiter visually gulped, before muttering an apology to Layton and rushing off to get a manager. Layton turned to me and frowned. Only you can call me Layton. Do not, I repeat, do not make me seem weak to others." His words were harsh, and said with a furious growl of anger. I whimpered at his tone and dropped my head. Drunk or not, I would always submit to an alpha. Sighing, Layton gripped my chin again. "Look into my eyes," he ordered like before. That was nice. It was odd to hear Layton describe something as nice, but I smiled slightly. It made me happy to know he was enjoying being with me. I did want, I was told, in his eyes again. But then I ruined the moment by laughing once more. I broke the eye contact to laugh and cover my mouth, and Layton sighed heavily. "You're drunk, I'm taking you home." Layton took some money out of his pocket and threw it onto the bed. Then, he stood up and gestured for me to follow him. I stood up, but as I did so I saw the world spin slightly. I gasped and wobbled on my feet. Layton caught me instantly. He grabbed my arm, nails digging into my skin due to his extreme strength. I whimpered in pain, and he instantly relaxed his grip. "I can't walk," I exclaimed. My voice was shrill and full of fear. "I heard that alcohol ruins brain cells. What if all my brain cells are broken, and it has damaged my motor functions? I won't be able to walk again." And Gemini, enough, Layton said. Then he did something completely out of character. He rolled his eyes. It was something I never expected to ever see Layton do. It was just such a juvenile and immature thing for him to do. It shocked me for a heavy second, but he carried on talking. "You're just had too much to drink. You're too small to drink so much, especially for someone who doesn't drink. You haven't damaged your brain, or affected your motor functions, or whatever other crap you're spouting about. You've just drank too much." He slipped his arm around my waist and led me out the restaurant. I felt my stomach turn and my head spin as I stepped into the evening air. Reaching out, I grabbed a handful of his suit and held on for dear life. Layton didn't complain, and held me close to his broad chest. It felt almost comforting in his hold, which was odd, because for someone who killed and tortured, he sure held me gently. He was worried I was going to break, I could tell. We reached Layton's car, and he lifted me into the passenger's seat. I was tired. As we drove back, I could feel my eyes slowly shutting and my body succumbing to the exhaustion. I cuddled into the seat as I rested my head against the car window. "Gemini, don't fall asleep. We're almost home." I mumbled in an incoherent way, and my eyes fluttered between open and closed, trying to keep the sleep at bay. It didn't take us long to get back to Layton's house, and when we got there I was too tired to get myself out of the car. Layton walked around to my side of the car and slowly opened the door. I yawned heavily, eyes preparing to close. "Come on," he said, leaning down and picking me up. He held me in a bridal fashion, pressing me to his broad chest. "Layton," I groaned, pressing my face into his chest. He carried me inside, not answering me. "Layton," I pestered again. "What? You're really cuddly like a bear." I giggled softly, burying my face closer to Layton. He stayed quiet and continued to carry me up the stairs. I felt my body placed on a soft bed and I smiled. However, my smile quickly turned into a frown when I felt Layton move away from me. "No," I complained, grabbing a hold of his suit jacket. I looked up at him as he gave me an inquisitive look. "Don't leave me, you're my cuddly bear," I pouted. Layton paused, half leaning over, half standing. Then he sighed. "If I stay with you tonight, you can't get upset in the morning. Because you asked me to be here." He wasn't making up excuses, he was telling me fact. "Okay, cuddle me, bear." I pulled him closer, but he just broke out the embrace. As he stood up, he pulled off his suit jacket and flicked his shoes off. After that, he walked around to the other side of the bed and lay down. Reaching out, I took a hold of his muscled arm, pulling myself closer to him. Layton muttered something which I didn't hear fully as I lay my head on his chest and pressed my body into his side. "I'm uncomfortable," I complained about 30 seconds later. "My clothes itch." I pulled at the dress, pushing it up slightly. "If you plan to get undressed, let me know so I can prepare myself," Layton grumbled, obviously annoyed at my behavior. I readjusted my clothes again. "I'm being serious, Gemini. I can't mate you yet, so if you plan to wear little clothing, make me aware so I can prepare myself. Otherwise, I may not be able to hold myself back." "Oh," I mumbled. "Well, can I take my dress off?" I asked. There was a long, heavy pause from Layton. Then he sat up, pushing me off his body. I made a noise of complaint as he walked out the room. Layton returned a few moments later, with a shirt of his in his hands. If I have to hold you all night, and you are wearing nothing, I won't be able to control myself. So you'll have to wear something that has my scent on it or I might go crazy. I nodded as he handed me the shirt. Layton turned away from me as I changed, which surprised me with how he made me drop my towel earlier that day. I changed quickly, which was uncomfortable because I was too tired to actually stand up to change. I'm changed, I mumbled as my eyes began to close again. I lay down on my pillow, nuzzling my head into the softness. A few seconds later, I felt the bed dip as Layton got onto the bed. I made no attempt to move closer to him, which caused him to growl at me. I groaned in my sleep, swatting at the air near where Layton was. Cuddle me, he snapped, sounding angry. I did what I was told and lay on his chest. He gave another growl, that one of satisfaction. Just as I was about to sleep, I sat up instantly, eyes wide and heart hammering. At my suddenly movement, Layton shot up, standing next to the bed in a defensive crouch. He growled and his eyes scanned the room. What's wrong? Sorry, I said, shocked as I looked at Layton. His hands were shaking, his body wanting to shift into his wolf form. I couldn't help but give a little giggle. I just wanted to know if the door were locked. At my words, Layton sighed heavily, running a hand down his face to show his stress. I locked the doors, Gemini, I promise. He got back on the bed and pulled me to his chest. I cuddled into him. He was warm and comfortable. Promise. I double-checked. I would never lie to you, Layton replied. I smiled at his words and cuddled slower into him. It was nice to be in his arms, almost too nice. Chapter 8. When I awoke with a pounding headache, I was alone in a cold bed. I cringed, rubbing my temples as I sat up in the bed. I remembered everything from the night before, yet I didn't understand why I had acted like that. Of course, I knew that it was the wine that had caused me to act like that, but I still questioned the choices I made. I blushed as I recalled calling Layton a cuddly bear, and slept on his chest for the night. I was beyond mortified, but Layton seemed to enjoy my cuddling, which surprised me greatly. After I had taken some headache tablets to curb the hangover, I had a bath and then returned to sleep. I didn't do much throughout the day, simply relaxed and recovered. I didn't hear anything from Layton until he returned that evening. What's for dinner? Those were the first words out of his mouth, and I hadn't prepared anything. I gave him a blank look, staring up at him in obvious fear. I hadn't made him dinner. I didn't realize I needed to. Seeing my expression, he sighed heavily. We'll order in, but tomorrow you start cooking, he instructed me. I immediately nodded yes, blushing from disappointing him. I glanced up at Layton from behind long lashes and noticed the large purple bags under his eyes. Are you all right? I asked, worried slightly. Layton worked awfully long hours and he was always serious. I wondered if all the work he did to keep the Endoro pack up and running was affecting his health. Without thinking about it, I raised my hand and placed it on his cheek. I ran my index finger under his left eye, along the creases of the tired bag, frowning as I did so. It was only as Layton froze at the contact that I realized what I had done. Sorry, I apologized, dropping my hand and stepping away. Layton looked down at me, frowning, before he gave me a quick nod. There's a pizza menu in one of the drawers in the kitchen, he said, before turning away and walking upstairs. I took a deep breath, clearing my head, before I got the menu and ordered a pizza. I waited on the couch, flicking the TV onto some reality show. I wasn't really watching it. When Layton returned, he had showered and redressed into something casual. He ran a hand through his wet hair as he took a seat next to me. Turn this shit off and put the game on. Then sit on my lap, Layton snapped, sounding angry. I quickly changed the channel, putting the football game on for him, then cautiously looked at him. Layton raised his arms, making room for me. He gave a deep growl when I didn't obey. I quickly moved, shifting my body so that I was positioned on his lap. His arms slipped around me as I leant onto his body. His muscled chest and arms surrounded me like a cage, cocooning me into his large body. As if it was an automatic response, I rested my head against his shoulder. I want to make you, Layton announced suddenly, eyes never waving from the football match. But I won't, he continued, no doubt being able to hear the pickup of my heartbeat. I have changed my mind. I will no longer give you a week. I will mate you the moment I smell your desire. I thought over his words for a few seconds, but you haven't smelt my desire yet. Layton finally moved his eyes away from the football match and looked down at me. No, because you have yet to feel any desire towards me. But I will find a way to make you feel it. Even if it kills me, I will make you want me. I gulped deeply, eyes cast to the downwards as my cheeks brightened. It scared me to think about what would happen if I didn't feel any desire towards Layton anytime soon. It wasn't that I didn't find Layton attractive because I did, it was that I was still scared of him. I knew that it would take me a while to no longer be scared of him, to no longer fear the blood alpha. Layton? I questioned, laying my head down on his shoulder again. Yes, I want to feel desire, I replied. I was blushing a bright red, absolutely mortified at what I was saying, even though I felt he needed to know. Layton didn't reply to me, so I pulled back slightly and looked up into his green eyes. Layton, will you make me feel desire? There was a long, heavy pause, then Layton shook his head. No, I won't, Kim, but I won't. If I begin to pleasure you, you'll feel the desire, but it would be forced, artificial. And I don't want that, and neither would you. I have done that to women in the past, not that they didn't feel some desire just looking at me, but I won't do that to you. How will I feel desire towards you? Layton let out a small chuckle, but it was full of bitterness. Gemini, if I knew that, I would have already made sure you'd done it. Because I want you to feel desire on your own, but I just hope it's soon. I nodded slightly and lay my head back down. Oh, you'll also be moving all your stuff into my bedroom. We will share my bed from now on, no deliberation on the matter. The following evening, I had dinner ready for Layton when he returned home. I had made him a casserole, and I was glad when he enjoyed it. I liked that he nodded, wiping the edge of his mouth. That was good. I'll make it again some other time, I smiled brightly, glad to have pleased him. Good. I'm going to change. He left the room as I cleared the plates away, smiling brightly. Reaching over to the window ledge, I flicked on the electronic radio, making soft music play. Fleetwood Mac. I hummed along to the voice of Stevie Nicks as I washed the plates up. Suddenly, a hand encircled my waist and I jumped. Layton's chest pressed to my back as his arms wrapped around my chest. I yelped in slight shock as Layton bent down and pressed his face into my neck. He chuckled. He was obviously in a good mood, and his breath blew over my skin. I shivered slightly, causing him to tighten his grip on my hips. Layton pressed his lips to my neck, kissing it softly. I was shocked, no, terrified, as I had never been kissed before, especially not on the neck. I froze up slightly as Layton continued to press kisses over my skin. I let my head fall back slightly as I felt his teeth scrap over my skin. I breathed deeply, heavily, as Layton carried on the kissing, rubbing his hips softly against my back. Felt nice and I enjoyed it. I wondered what it would be like to have him kiss me fully, lips on lips. I wondered what it would be like to run my hands over his searing skin. I wondered what it would be like if he were to make love to move. I moaned as he continued to kiss. At the sound, Layton moved away from me, eyes wide and shocked. Desire, he choked out. I smell your desire. His words were a shock to me, but I was happy. I did feel desire towards Layton, and I was happy. But he wasn't. He took a step back from me, running a hand down his face. I was confused. He had wanted me to feel desire since the moment we met, but as soon as I first felt desire, he moved away from me as if I was diseased. I thought you wanted my desire, I whispered, tears filling up my eyes. The unshed tears had caused my voice to wobble. Hearing my voice, Layton's eyes snapped up to mine. Seeing my upset, he sighed heavily. Why are you upset now? He demanded, sounding angry. You're rejecting me. You said we would mate when I felt desire towards you, but now you don't want me. Don't be so foolish. Of course I want you, he snapped. Then, he turned on his heels and stormed out the house. I whimpered at the sound of the front door slamming shut. I didn't like it when Layton was angry. His anger always scared me. Layton didn't return home that night, so I slept in the bed alone. I wondered and worried about what was wrong with Layton and if he'd had slept at all. I couldn't help but worry about his health some more. He didn't sleep often and worked too much. By the time noon came and I still hadn't heard anything, I decided I needed to see Layton. So I dressed in a purple dress and left the house. I had yet to leave the house with Layton, and that had only been on one occasion, so I was unsure on where to go exactly. But I knew that Layton's office was in the big building near the entrance to the Pact village, so I headed in that direction. I was wringing my hands nervously occasionally pushing my blonde hair behind my ears. When I first entered the Pact village, I was surprised to see how busy it was. The Pact busied themselves going in between shops with friends and family. There was a high level of chatter and happy laughter. I found that odd. In my head I had always thought that the Endoro Pact would have been reserved and sober simply because of the strictness of their alpha. But then I knew that they probably all agreed with Layton's decisions and that he treated them well. So maybe I was quick to judge when I wasn't in the Pact. As I walked down the main strip of the village, a man in his early 20s noticed me. His eyes widened in shock, and quickly bowed his head to me in submission. "Afternoon, alpha female veterinariano," he said. I didn't know what to. I was always the submissive one, and had never been submitted to before. I also didn't know how to react with being called the alpha female, and that I had Layton's surname. It was all a shock, but I knew I had to reply. "Thank you," I said, smiling slightly at the man. He nodded again before moving away. Others followed his lead when they worked out who I was as I walked through the Pact village. I was blushing a bright red, embarrassed. As I walked past an old couple, I heard them talking and blushed further. "Isn't the alpha female beautiful?" The old woman gasped, speaking louder than she thought she was. "Yes, no wonder that the alpha chose her," her husband replied. "Let's hope she can make the alpha forget about Alyssa. The poor man has never been able to get over what she did." The woman's words intrigued me, and I pouted slightly. I wondered who Alyssa was, and if it was her who had made Layton so emotionless and closed off. When I reached the large building where Layton's office was, I asked a pack wolf similar age to myself where Layton's office was. "Alpha female veterinariano, let me show you the way," he said, bowing his head and averting his eyes. I didn't like everyone submitting to me. It made me feel lonely. It solidified the fact that I was their superior and I would never have more than a professional relationship with anyone other than Layton. It made me feel very lonely that everyone was so cold towards me, even though I would have been the same if the roles were reversed. The pack wolf left me outside Layton's office, which was on the top floor. I paused outside for a second before I knocked on the door. There was a long pause before I heard Layton's gruff voice. "What do you want?" "Layton, it's me," I replied, biting my bottom lip. There was another pause before the door opened. I looked up at Layton, who didn't look happy. "What?" he growled, blocking the doorway with his body. "I was worried about you," I admitted, after last night. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "Where did you sleep?" "I slept in my office," Layton replied, his voice suspicious. "I don't think that's very good for you, Layton. You'll get ill if you keep working so hard. Will you come home tonight?" I looked into his eyes, hoping I sounded as brave as I wanted. Layton just looked at me as if I were crazy. I didn't understand his behavior, but I stayed silent. "Yes," he finally answered, "I'll be home at 8. "All right, I'll have dinner ready." I smiled before I got on my tiptoes and placed a soft kiss of his cheek. It was a bold move on my part, what with how rocky our relationship was. But I did it anyway, blushing before stepping away and offering him a small smile. He looked beyond shocked. "I'll see you at home." Chapter 9. When Layton returned, we ate dinner together in silence, then I cleaned up the plates as Layton watched TV. Walking into the lounge, Layton looked up at me with a small smile. "Come, sit," he said, holding his arms up for me to sit on his lap. I offered him a small smile, before going over and taking on his lap. I cuddled into his automatically, and leant my head against his shoulder. "Layton, I don't understand," I said. Layton paused. "You don't understand what?" I chuckled slightly at the statement. "There are a lot of things I don't understand, Layton. You being the biggest. But I'm talking about yesterday. I felt desire, but you didn't want me, and since I first met you, all you wanted me to do was feel desire. So why did you run from me the moment it happened?" Layton frowned, looking down at me for a few minutes, before the corner of his lips turned up slightly. "What you felt yesterday was sexual desire. You wanted to mate with me. And yes, I want you to feel sexual desire, but not until after you feel normal desire. I want both from you." "What's the difference?" I asked, confused. "Sexual desire is the want of sex, the want to mate me. Plain desire is just the want for something. The want for me." Layton looked at me for another second, before he turned away to face the TV again. I thought over his words for a minute, before everything seemed to make sense to me. "You're scared," I blurted out. Layton's eyes snapped down to mine, and they glared at me before he growled. The sound was low and scratchy, full of dominance. I wanted to submit to him, my entire body wanted to crumble at his feet. But I kept his gaze. I didn't mean to upset you, Layton, I began. Then don't suggest I am scared, I am not weak like that. He snapped angrily through gritted teeth. Being scared doesn't make you weak, Layton. It makes you normal, I told him with a small smile. But what I meant was, you're scared that I only feel sexual desire towards you and not normal desire. You're worried that I don't want you, you're being absurd, That's why you didn't come home last night, wasn't it? Because you didn't want to face me, you were scared that I didn't want you except for sexual reasons. Everything was suddenly so clear to me, I understood all his actions from the night previous. Layton didn't reply, he just scoffed. I giggled at his dismissal, he was acting childish. He frowned deeply at me, don't laugh at me. His words just made me laugh more, and I had to bite my lip to stop myself from chuckling more. Seriously, don't laugh at me, Layton growled. I was still sitting on his lap, so I buried my face in his neck to hide my laughter. I'm sorry, I said through a giggle, don't be mad. I giggled again. I'm not mad, Layton sighed. It's nice that you're not scared of me anymore. His arms tightened around me, and I pulled my head out from his neck. You didn't submit to me, that was nice. He shrugged it off, trying to sound casual. People submitted to me today, I replied, looking deep into Layton's eyes. Once more the green bewitched me with their beauty. Layton nodded slightly. I would hope so, you are their alpha female. If they hadn't submitted, I would have been angry. It made me feel lonely, like I was something different, an outsider. You must have felt like that your entire life. It must have been horrible as a kid. You'd have never known whether people liked you for you, or because you were the future alpha. There was a heavy pause as Layton and I just looked at each other. His bright eyes were staring at me, his eyes studying me closely. He wanted to say something, I could see that much, but he was holding himself back. He wanted to open up to me, but he just wasn't ready yet. I smiled sadly before cupping his cheek with one of my hands. Alpha Veteriano, your life must be so lonely. A few hours later, when we went to bed, Layton embraced me close as we lay together. My back was to him, as his large body curled around my small one. Gemini, he whispered into my ear when I was seconds from falling asleep. Please take the loneliness away. Then I fell asleep. Another week passed quickly, and soon Layton and I fell into a normal routine. He would work during the days and I would either stay at home or take a walk around the territory, before we would spend the evenings together. It was all very mundane. It surprised me how normal a life with the Blood Alpha was. I was getting a lot more comfortable with Layton, getting used to his sudden mood changes, dominant behavior and old-fashioned attitude. It took me only a few days with Layton to realize he believed that men went out to work, while women stayed at home. I was alright with that because the majority of werewolves also believed that. It was how it was with our ancestors, men hunting, while women had pups, and the traditions hadn't really changed. Of course, some of the women in the modern days went out to work, but it was only for the pack and the alpha had to agree to it. In the Endoro pack, none of the women worked. However, Layton made sure that all the women met up regularly so they weren't isolated. He also made sure that every male in the pack worked unless they were elderly. So, after about 2 weeks of me being with the Endoro pack, Layton told me I had to go to one of the lunches with the other pack woman. The lunch was being held in one of the restaurants in the pack village, and every woman had to go. Layton came home an hour before the lunch, telling me he would take me. I was slightly relieved. I was nervous. It was always hard for me to make friends, especially with other women. And because I was their alpha female, I felt it would be even worse. Is this alright? I asked Layton, walking into the kitchen where he was eating the sandwich I'd made him. Layton studied my outfit. I had chosen a knee-length scarlet red dress, which was in a 40s style. I paired it with a pair of red kitten heels, a matching lipstick and a small bag. My blonde hair curled over my shoulder. Layton didn't reply, just stared at me. It's too much, isn't it? I worried, thinking everyone would laugh at me. I'll go change. No, he growled up. Jumping up, he grabbed my arm before I could leave the kitchen. You look beautiful, don't change. Layton offered me a small smile, looking almost embarrassed, before turning away and going back to his lunch. I blushed at his words, before taking a seat at the kitchen counter. A silence between Layton and I as he ate. Neither Layton nor I were loud people, so it was often quiet between us. However, it wasn't ever awkward between us. We were used to our quiet life. When it was time for the lunch, Layton walked me to the Pact village. As we began the walk, Layton's hand took mine. I glanced down at our conjoined hands, shocked, before I looked up at Layton. He was staring straight ahead, completely ignoring the fact, pretending it was norm for us. So I played along and didn't acknowledge us holding hands and just allowed it to happen. Before I forget, Layton said as we walked, "Don't let people call you by your first name. They should call you alpha female and nothing else. I know you don't like it, but it has to be done." Okay, I nodded, giving him a sad smile. I was hoping to make friends, and I knew I wouldn't do that if they had to use my title to address me. "Don't be nervous," Layton whispered to me when we neared the restaurant. "You're their alpha female." It was nice of Layton to say, to reduce my nerves, and I knew it wasn't something he did often. He was trying to reassure me. In his own way, it was nice to know he cared. There were a few males also dropping off their mates at the restaurant. However, due to the large amount of she-wolves, there were a few unmated males hanging around outside. Layton didn't like that, especially when a few stared a bit too long at me than was respectful. Outside the restaurant, a middle-aged woman noticed us and smiled brightly. She had short blonde hair, which was swept to one side, and she wore a black lace dress. "Alpha Veteriano, alpha female Veteriano," she bowed her head. "Hello, Arlene," Layton said to the woman. She looked friendly and gave me a massive smile. I couldn't help but smile back. "I hope I can depend on you to look after my mate today." Layton's voice told her that if he couldn't depend on her, she was going to be in trouble. "Of course I will," Alpha Arlene grinned back. She was a nice lady who seemed genuinely caring. It had been a long time since I had seen someone so happy. I couldn't help but like her. Layton turned to me and nodded slightly. "I'll meet you at home tonight," he said. I smiled and nodded back. Layton paused as if he wanted to say something else, before his eyes glanced around the area. Every eye was on us. Layton forcefully grabbed my neck and I was shocked. Quickly he bent down and kissed me. His lips sealed over mine in a rushed way. The kiss didn't even last a second, and I didn't realize it had happened until it was over. I always thought my first kiss would have been like the movies, magical and loving, something that called butterflies to my stomach. Yet I couldn't recall a single thing about my first kiss. It happened so quick that I had to question if it had actually happened. But with the way that Layton's eyes bored into mine and watched me closely, I knew it had happened. Layton gave me another nod before turning and walking away. People submitted to him as he walked away. It was only as I watched him leave that I realized how many people were around, and the unmated males were no longer looking my way. I then understood the meaning of the kiss, a deterrent, a way to warn males away from me. His possessiveness was almost amusing, especially since no one would dare try and steal the Blood Alpha's mate. Not to mention I was having a lunch with a large group of women. Arlene led me into the hotel, and all the tables had been pushed together to make a large square around the interior. She led me to a seat near the middle and she sat next to me. We spoke a little bit, as the room filled up with other women. The average wolf pack had about 40 wolves, but the Endoro pack had 60 wolves. We were a large pack with roughly about 30 she-wolves. So the narrow restaurant filled up quickly, and it very squished. But it was nice, it was communal. "So sweetie, how are you adjusting to life here at Endoro?" Arlene asked me as her friends sat around us. They were all a lot older than me, but they all seemed nice. Layton had told me not to let the she-wolves call me by my first name. But sweetie wasn't my first name, so technically, I wasn't disobeying him. "It's very different to my old pack," I replied, but it was more getting used to living with Layton, Alpha Veteriano, that was the biggest thing I had to get used to. Arlene nodded. "Yep, I remember when I was first chosen by Steve. It was so odd," she laughed. The other women all agreed, and began to talk of their own mates. I zoned out slightly and glanced around the room. The women all knew each other, and were chatting between themselves in little groups. I felt slightly lonely, even though Arlene and her friends were trying hard to include me. The women all seemed nice, and they made an effort to talk to me during the lunch we ate. But I was uncomfortable. Maybe I was being paranoid, but I felt everything was judging me silently, of course, and still saw me as an outsider. I wanted more than anything to be at home in Layton's arms. The realization surprised me greatly. I had become very dependent on him. After we finished eating, someone clanged a glass and everyone fell silent. I looked over to the other side of the room, and saw a familiar red-haired woman standing up. Andrea Layton's ex-girlfriend. She looked as beautiful as ever, with a tight pencil shirt and a pink blouse. She stood up with her glass in her hand. She smiled at the women in the room, who all looked over to her. So, as we all know, the women of the pack are obviously the most important people, she joked. A few women cheered as everyone else laughed. Andrea continued her speech. However, we have to work together to support our pack, our mates, our alpha. Her eyes glanced briefly at me when she mentioned Layton before continuing. As you all know by now, Alpha Veteriano recently chose a mate. Today is the first time she has joined us. Eyes all turned to me, and I hid my shaking hands under the table. I hated how everyone's eyes on me and a small blush filled my cheeks. I didn't want to be the center of attention. Andrea gave me a condescending smile, her eyes looking cruel. I knew that the speech wouldn't go well. Now our new alpha female Gemma, Andrea carried on. Gemini, I correctly in a quiet voice. Sorry, Gemini. She rolled her eyes, purposely being disrespectful by not using my title. Some women in the room cringed slightly, but didn't stop her. The females here in Endoro Pack look after one another and have each other's backs. You are, obviously, the newest member to the pack, so we have a problem there. I wanted to ask how there was a problem, but stayed silent and listened. We respect our mates here and our alpha. However, from what I've heard, you don't respect your mate or your alpha. Her words made me panic. I didn't know what she was going to say. Andrea, Arlene warned, not looking happy. Andrea ignored her. Not only did you force yourself into Alpha Veteriano's life by lying about pregnancy to make his choose you, you forced him to leave his girlfriend and supply you with money. I will never call you my alpha female because you don't deserve to be with our alpha. You're lying, I exclaimed, tears falling from my eyes. I was sad she was saying such hateful things. I was angry that she was trying to hurt me, but more than anything, I was worried the other women would believe her. I didn't do any of that. Layton chose me because he wanted me, I sniffed. Oh please, Andrea snorted, looking at me as if I were a child. You're a pathetic child who was an easy lay for Layton. He only took you as a mate because you pretended to be pregnant. I didn't, I cried, shaking my head. I glanced around the room and saw a few of the women looking at me with disgust. Thinking they believed her, I was mortified. So I grabbed my bag and ran out of the restaurant as I cried. Chapter 10. Angrily, Layton stormed into the room. What happened? He growled out, furious. I had only been home a matter of minutes, but I was still crying from Andrea's humiliation. Seeing Layton was nice, he was a familiar for me. I ran to him and quickly flung my arms around him. Layton was shocked and stood rigid for a few seconds as I gripped his shirt and sobbed. But after a momentary pause, he picked me up and walked us over to the couch. He didn't show any sympathy for me, simply held me close as I cried. My head buried itself in his nape as I gripped his shirt, almost ripping it with how hard I held on. The entire pack hate me, I wailed, my tears wetting Layton's shirt, yet he didn't complain. No, they don't, Layton told me, a fierceness in his voice. You're their alpha female, they adore and respect you. If they didn't, I would kill them all. Now tell me why you'd think like that. So I told him what Andrea did. I cried as I told him, occasionally hiccuping in between words. The more I told him, the more I got upset. They believed her, Layton, they all believed her, I finished. Get yourself cleared up, Layton snapped, angrily, as he moved me off his lap and stood up. I looked up at him with confusion. Go, change your clothes and sort your makeup out. And get me a shirt while you're up there. I did as I was told and quickly changed. I grabbed Layton a dark blue shirt and carried it down to him. He quickly changed his shirt before grabbing my hand. Layton, where are we going? I asked, scared, as he pulled me towards the door. Pausing, Layton turned to face me and cupped my cheeks in his large hands. I am not going to allow Andrea to get away with this. I will make an example out of her. I'm going to set every member of this pack straight. He dropped his hands before taking my arm and pulling me out the house. We walked down to the pack village. While I walked, Layton stormed. He was furious. I was nervous about what he had planned. I was terrified that he would make me responsible for someone's death. Layton, you really need to calm down, I hissed, scared. No, I don't. No one treats my mate like that. When we reached the village, Layton's grip on my hands tightened slightly. It neither reassured me nor scared me, but it made my worry increase. The village was busy, people everywhere. Silence, Layton screamed. Almost everyone cringed and submitted. I had to stop myself as well. Someone get me Andrea Falster, now, Layton ordered. And I want every man, bitch and child here within the next 3 minutes. No matter what they are doing. His voice was loud, dominant and full of rage. He sounded like a true alpha. Layton was such a contrast from me, confident, direct, full of control and power. And I was the complete opposite. We were so different, yet for some reason we kind of worked together. Even if things were complicated and confusing between us, it didn't mean that I didn't care for Layton or want to be with Layton. There were times, a lot of them, where I was terrified of him, but there were also times, a lot of them, where he showed me how much he cared about me, even if it was in the wrong way. When the entire pack was gathered, and Andrea was brought in front of us, Layton addressed everyone. As every pack member here is aware, there was a lunch today arranged for all the females of the pack. As I'm sure most of you were aware, I took a mate recently. And my bitch, your alpha female, was there at lunch. However, today some of the females today took a disliking to my new mate. He gestured to me. One of the pack bitches decided to make her dislike towards my mate, towards her alpha female, very public knowledge. She made up spiteful lies to hurt my bitch, and purposely spoke badly of her. He gestured to Andrea, who stood in front of Layton with scared eyes. Everything she said about my mate, the way she manipulated me into choosing her, the fact she falsified a pregnancy, and how she is only out for my money. All of those are lies. First off, my mate and I met at the mating ceremony for the first time. Second of all, my mate was a virgin before she met me. And lastly, my mate has spent none of my money, and I had to actually force her to allow me to let me to buy her clothing. A few pack males laughed, and even I smiled slightly. However, Layton continued, even if these rumors were to be true, which they're not, my mate is still the alpha female. None of you would disrespect me like that, so never disrespect my mate like that. Understood? Everyone in the area nodded. Before I heard a chorus of understood, alpha. There was a momentary pause before Layton turned to Andrea. What you have done is inexcusable. So now you will be punished. Layton paused, looking at Andrea. Her red hair was messed, where she had fought with the pack members that brought her to us, and her eyes were wide and wet with unshed tears. She looked as scared as I first felt when Jacob pushed me into Layton a few weeks back. Layton raised his fist and punched. I flinched, shocked with his actions. Andrea screamed, before falling to the ground with a strangled cry. Layton's face was completely blank, emotionless and empty. He wasn't Layton then, he was the blood alpha. Stepping forward, Layton advanced on Andrea and continued to beat her. His fist, his foot, his elbow, and every one other part of his body he could. He used to inflict pain on his former lover. I was tearing up as it happened. It was horrible to watch. I glanced around the pack members, and noticed how most of the she-wolves and children were looking away. They also couldn't stomach it. A few still watched, as did the males in the pack. I had a feeling it was a normal occurrence for them all. I looked at Layton and I realized something. He wasn't a mean person. He just had a vicious temper. Even though Layton had a straight face, I could see the fierceness in his beautiful green eyes. No one was as close to him as I was, so they couldn't see. But I could. He was losing control. Andrea was unconscious, but he continued to beat her. His eyes were turning from angry to wild. He was losing control over the little humanity he had. I rushed to his side, and I saw a few males step forward in worry. Layton, I whispered in a low voice, hoping no one else would hear. Layton, that's enough. You'll kill her if you carry on, I hissed. Layton paused before he glanced at me. Blood had sprayed all over him, covering his outfit, hands and face. His knuckles looked bruised. He looked at me, really looked at me as if it were the first time he was seeing me. Then, he stepped away from Andrea's unconscious and bloodied body. Her face was disfigured and bruised. I felt sick just looking at it. I stopped the bile rising in my throat by swallowing it down. I turned to the man nearest us. It was Beta Strider. We weren't close, in fact I was scared of him. We'd only met once, but he'd threatened to beat me and I didn't like that. I didn't think our relationship was any better, but he was the closest to me. Get the pack doctor, she needs immediate treatment, I ordered. It was odd speaking to anyone like that, but I knew Layton was too angry to think of medical attention for Andrea. But I may have not liked her, but that didn't mean I wanted her dead. Beta Strider frowned. not looking happy with me telling him what to do. Yes, alpha female veteriano, he replied through harshly gritted teeth. He turned away to locate the doctor. I quickly turned back to Layton and took his bloodied hand. Let's go, I pleaded. Layton nodded, and we left the village. It was a silent walk home, a heavy tension between the two of us. When we reached home, I could tell Layton was back to normal, which relaxed me greatly. Layton headed towards the lounge, but I pulled his hand back. He froze, giving me a look of confusion, before I pulled him in the direction of the bathroom. Let me clean you up, I said. Layton nodded, and I pulled him after me. I sat Layton on the bathtub rim, before grabbing a cloth and running it under the water. I stepped up to Layton and began to wash the blood off his face. Even sitting on the bathtub, he was taller than me, but only slightly. He was watching me closely, analyzing my every move. Reaching out, Layton slipped his arms around my waist. He pulled me close. Our faces were mere inches apart, our breathing getting mingled together. She deserved that, he told me, hot breath fanning over my face. I know, I replied. Layton ignored me and carried on as if I hadn't said anything. She deserved that and so much more. She deserved to die in the most horrible ways for what she said. He paused, taking a deep breath. You are an angel. You're so good and pure and kind and sensitive. You're an angel. And she's nothing but a devious, lying little. Layton, calm down. I dropped the cloth and took Layton's face in mine, the hint of stubble tickling my fingers. His green eyes held an emotion I had never seen in Layton before. Vulnerability. You fit, he whispered to me, resting his forehead against mine. You fit with me, it was meant this way. You fit. The following morning, I woke up in Layton's arms. Usually he was gone by the time I awoke, but that morning he stayed. My head rested against his chest, as his arms were wrapped around my waist. Morning, Layton said, as I turned to smile up at him. You stayed late today, I thought you'd be at the office, I grinned. Not that I'm complaining. I couldn't deny that I enjoyed being in Layton's company. It was the first time since the mating ceremony that I was happy that Layton had chosen me. I was glad he was my mate. I wanted to stay with you this morning, he replied, pushing a strand of my hair away from my face. I was supposed to do some important paperwork today, he laughed. It was nice to hear him laugh. But, I giggled. But I decided that you were much more important than that important paperwork. Pushing my hair behind my ear, he held my face. I giggled slightly. I liked when Layton was like that. Well, how about we start the day with breakfast in bed? I suggested, leaning up to run my hands through his dark hair. I think that would be perfect, he nodded. I smiled before leaning up and pressing a kiss to his cheek. I blushed brightly before climbing out of the bed and heading downstairs to the kitchen. As I began to make the breakfast, I heard movement on the stairs. It's not breakfast in bed, if you're not in bed, I commented, as the bacon sizzled in front of me. Layton chuckled as his arms went around me. He placed a kiss on my neck. I turned around to face him. He kept his hands on my hips. I realized in that moment how good my life had become. When I used to think of my mate, I thought of someone who took care of me. And Layton did that. When I used to think of my mate, I thought of someone who cuddled me in the morning. And Layton did that. When I used to think of my mate, I thought of someone who I wanted to spend every day with. And that was Layton. With that realization, I smiled up at Layton. He just looked at me with wide eyes. What? I asked, suddenly worried. You're feeling desire for me. Real desire, he smiled brightly. It was the first time I had ever seen him smile fully. He was beautiful when he smiled like that. You want me, he whispered, speaking more to himself than me. I chuckled slightly before reaching up to cup his cheeks. Yes, Layton, I want you. Then he kissed me. Don't let the story end. Subscribe to continue our Wolf Pack legend.